everybody. We are back for the conclusion of Masters of Disaster. Thank you to Gary Paulson and Scholastic for letting us read these aloud during this COVID mess where we don't get to be together. All right, here's our conclusion with chapters 7 and 8. Chapter 7 is called The Last Great Race, Memorial Day Parade Disaster. The Dog Sled Plan. Final report and summary respectfully submitted by Riley Dolan. The dog sled plan was launched at precisely 0900 hours, 43 minutes on Saturday morning, 47 hours and 17 minutes prior to the Memorial Day parade, when Henry Moseley began to figure out the parade entry he and his friends Reed Hamner and Riley Dolan, author of this report, would submit this year. Moseley's inspiration was a pack of 7 dogs, a Rottweiler, a Golden Lab, 2 Irish Setters, a Border Collie, a Wired-haired Terrier mix, and a Chihuahua, the current client list of Hamner's fledgling dog-walking business. The dogs were tangled together and squirming, and Hamner was patiently trying to untangle their leashes from each other when Moseley first conceived his parade entry idea. Moseley suggested emulating the Iditarod, the dog sled race across Alaska, despite the fact that there hadn't been sufficient snow for a dog sled race in May in Ohio since the Ice Age, and that access to the kind of dog sleds that traditionally run the race was sorely lacking. The willingness of Queso the Chihuahua, Kelly and Patty the Irish Setters, Glavin the Border Collie, Wiley the Terrier mix, Carl the Rottweiler, and Annie the Golden Lab was taken as a given in the midst of Moseley's enthusiastic adoption of the dog sled concept. Without securing the full support of his peers, Moseley devised a mock sled made of plywood, harnesses made of nylon webbing sewn together, and a gang line and tugs made of rope that would be hooked to the front of the sled. Having once read a book about dog sledding, Moseley insisted that clamping 4 skateboards underneath the mock sled would compensate for the lack of snow. But that complete control of the contraption would remain with the boys due to the addition of an old piece of carpet as a makeshift brake, fastened to the back of the sled with a stout line. Despite Hamner's reluctance to utilize the dogs from his business, Moseley prevailed by likening the parade to the daily walks on which Hamner was paid to take the dogs, and suggesting that replacing the leashes with rope tugs tied to a gang line and riding in the sled instead of walking with the dogs would provide minimal disruption to the dogs' schedules and create absolutely no possibility for disaster. We know that's wrong, right? Hamner and Dolan lacked the will to say no because, 1, Hamner knew that one Erica Peterson and her synchronized skate team would be selling lemonade at the parade, and 2, yours truly had a desire to see how everything turned out. Yours truly means the person who's talking. The plan was reluctantly put into action. The morning of Memorial Day was spectacular. The sun was shining, the sky was filled with puffy clouds, and there was absolutely no evidence that later in the day a mixed herd of llamas, ponies, and dogs would stampede through the front of the ice cream store, funnel out the back covered with Rocky Road ice cream and peach fat-free yogurt, swing around to the left and run amok in the back alley before being rounded up by a mounted police force. Initially, Moseley's plan unfolded smoothly, with the singular exception of the small tangle that forced Hamner to run alongside the dogs as they pulled the sled from his house down to the starting area, because the house pets didn't know what a lead dog was. Well, Queso knew, but no other dog wanted to follow a Chihuahua, especially when they were 4 times faster and 14 times bigger than Queso. At that point, Moseley was still insisting, the whole thing is going to go like clockwork. The parade stepped off from the community center at precisely 1000 hours, led by the veterans, the parade marshal, and the mayor, all of whom were riding in convertibles. Following the dignitaries were many papier-mâché decorated floats representing various community organizations. The fire and police departments flashed lights and blasted sirens from their respective trucks and cars. The high school football team led the marching band and cheerleading squad from the school. A quilting club, a cooking class, and a book group shared space on an antique steam engine. A group of 5 llamas and 10 riderless ponies from the local petting zoo followed closely behind a small theatrical group from the after-school center's production of Grease. The dog sled, assorted tractors, collectible muscle cars, and a motorcycle stunt team brought up the rear of what everyone later agreed could have been the best Memorial Day parade suburban Cleveland had ever seen. At this juncture, it's important to mention that for years, the area at the center of the suburb had been the stomping ground of a domestic cat gone wild. Scarred from many battles, partially hairless from countless scrapes, and gently confused as a result of his advanced age, Goran had used at least 6 of his 9 lives and currently lived under a dumpster near the ice cream store. Despite being feral and half mad, Gorin was surprisingly social and enjoyed a good parade as much as anyone else in town. Mosley was at the rear of the sled, and Hamner was trotting along in front, confidently leading his dog team through the streets, waving to his relatives and friends and searching for signs of Erica Peterson and her synchronized skate team along the parade route as they approached the spot from which Gorin had chosen to watch the parade, 174 feet from the entrance of the ice cream store. When the dogs jogged past Gorin, they were immediately behind the ponies, which were behind the llamas, which followed the assortment of theater students dressed up in poodle skirts and black leather jackets, singing an a cappella version of We Go Together with what this reporter can only call an excessive amount of shank shabops. That's all from Greece. You can ask your parents or grandparents. The cat was quietly watching the parade. The dogs were enjoying being in the parade. Dwight Hauser, however, who has never enjoyed anything in his entire miserable, misbegotten life, had to go and ruin everything. This reporter, who was jogging alongside the dog sled, taking notes and snapping the occasional photo along with running the video camera, spotted Hauser, who spotted the dogs as they spotted the cat. Even so, nothing would have happened had Hauser's tiny mind not conceived an evil, vicious, malicious plan. Hauser leaned over as the dogs trotted by and said, meow, right into the ear of the Chihuahua. The Chihuahua, obeying some genetic code that makes even frail, tiny, practically decrepit dogs think and act as if they were a direct link to prehistoric pack-hunting wolves, leapt out of his ill-fitting harness. The standard-size harnesses afforded a great deal of wiggle room for Queso, and once freed, he tore after the cat. The Chihuahua's explosive surge of speed and his bloodthirsty snarling and yipping triggered the Rottweiler's latent bloodlust, and Carl was a dog who couldn't resist a chase. His full-power lunge jerked the rest of the team ahead, yanking Hamner off his feet and dragging him after the sled by the rope tied to his waist. As the sled jumped forward, the rug brake was jerked from beneath Mosley's feet, and he fell onto the sled on his face, his feet kicking in the air. Perched on top of 4 sets of free-rolling skateboard wheels and unencumbered by Hamner acting as lead dog or Mosley exerting pressure on the rug brake, the dog streaked through the middle of the parade like a jet-powered train. The team and the sled plowed directly into the pack of llamas, which got tangled up with the herd of ponies, which tripped the grade school singers, all of whom became entwined in the dog's gang line. The entire spitting, braying, barking, screaming, singing mass headed for Gorin. While he was normally willing to enter into battle with all real and perceived threats, Gorin knew he was outnumbered, and adopting discretion as the better part of valor, he ducked down and headed for the nearest escape route, which at that moment proved to be the open door of the ice cream store, from which the Reverend Potter Jenks was emerging with his annual Memorial Day treat, French vanilla covered with sprinkles on a handmade waffle cone. So involved was Reverend Jenks with managing the dripping cone that he did not see the large cat followed by llamas and ponies and dogs and singers, and a makeshift dog sled with one boy upside down and another being dragged alongside by a rope tied around his waist. The cone, halfway to his mouth, was slammed into his face, blinding him as the hooved, pawed, barking, screaming, spitting, singing tsunami roared over him and into the store. Witnesses, including this reporter, saw Gorin make 2 quick loops of the shop, pursued by the mob, before he blew a hole through the exact center of the screen door leading to the back alley. He was followed immediately by llamas, ponies, dogs, rowdy theater students, still singing, the sled, and Mosley and Hamner, who later denied that they had screamed the whole time, even though Lacey, the girl who worked at the ice cream store, testifies she clearly heard Hamner bellow, "Call 911!" as she stood paralyzed, a cup of mango strawberry gelato melting in her hand. The torn screen frayed the rope that attached Hamner to the dog team, but his momentum was such that, once freed, he flew straight toward the porta-potty that the town fathers had placed in the alley for the parade route. In the back alley, Gorin streaked up a power pole, where he clung to the top by his claws, shaking. The rest of the animals, joyous but exhausted, milled around the alley underneath the pole, making it easier for the police's mounted unit to round up the still spitting llamas, ice cream-covered ponies, and howling dogs, while simultaneously freeing the musical actors from the melee. Local law enforcement, in this observer's opinion, did a magnificent job and delivered each animal and miner back to its proper supervisor, a little the worse for wear to be sure, but in a surprisingly upbeat mood. Do you remember Mom Blink? He's still barking. Hey, Mom. Enough. Come here. Hi. You have to be quiet. We're reading. You have to be quiet. In the end, 2 boys rested up-ended in the deserted alley. "Is it over?" Hamner called from underneath the tipped-over porta-potty. I think I'm okay, even though my head seems to have been propelled through a wall of this outside bathroom thingy, and I'm looking at the business end of the toilet seat, which makes it hard to breathe. And somebody's here. Okay, someone came to my door, sorry. In the end, two boys rested upended in the deserted alley. Is it over? Hamner called from underneath the tipped-over porta-potty. I think I'm okay, even though my head seems to have been propelled through a wall of this outside bathroom thingy, and I'm looking at the business end of the toilet seat, which makes it hard to breathe. And I don't mean to worry anyone or complain, but I think I got road rash when I was pulled along the ground after the dog team, because there's a kind of burning and stinging and itching with isolated patches of numbness along the right side of my body. It was, Mosley said dreamily. Awesome. The noise was overpowering, and the syncopated rhythm of so many different animals and small children was amazing. I hope Riley got this on video so we can watch it later. And is it just me, or do you think the community access cable channel would leap at the chance to air that footage? It'd be nice to be on TV, Hamner agreed. A replay would fill in the gaps of what I may have missed when I was upside down and skidding after the dog team on my face. Mosley went on, it's like I said the last time, we're really getting good at this adventure stuff. And now the world, or at least the world that subscribes to our local community access cable channel, will see how enterprising and take charge we are. He climbed out of the sled and pried the porta-potty door off Hamner's head. I'm glad we decided we needed to shake things up. Best decision we ever made. The videotape of the parade is submitted herewith as visual proof that the contents of this report are true and accurate to the best of this reporter's abilities. Sincerely yours, Riley Dolan. Here's our last chapter. Chapter 8 is called Propaganda and Turtle Dregs. It's the last day of school, men, Henry announced as he and Reed limped to the cafeteria for lunch. It was the day after the Memorial Day parade. Riley followed, not limping. We need to make it special, and there's a wrong I've seen that we need to right. I have an idea. I don't know that I'm up for another plan so soon after the last one, Henry, Reed said. Although being dragged along the parade route and through the ice cream store and out into the alley on my side by a dog team and a herd of ponies and a flock of llamas and several dozen musically inclined students seemed to lessen the constant smell of baby duty and fetid dumpster rot and bat guano and cow pies. I think it's just because layers of my skin were removed. I don't think it's a good idea to do another plan until the scabs on the entire right side of my body have dropped off, or at least reached the crusty healing stage instead of this oozy red open sore thing I got going on. Yeah, that's pretty gross, Henry admitted. He watched Riley toss Reed a fresh tube of salve and put some gauze, bandages, and tape out of the first aid kit. But the idea I have is psychological warfare. We do everything from a computer terminal in the library. No risk, no danger, no poop. Nothing that would keep me from moving out of the garage back to the basement and maybe even someday all the way back to my bedroom if I stopped stinking and itching and oozing and crying in my sleep and periodically flinching like I am these days. Nothing like that, Henry said. You've been going through a rough patch, buddy. Way to take one for the team. You're an inspiration and, have I mentioned, really tough. Thanks. Reed shrugged modestly and dabbed at the scrape on his right wrist with a cotton ball dipped in hydrogen peroxide from Riley's first aid kit. What wrong needs righting? Riley asked, pulling his small digital voice recorder from his pocket and clicking it on so he could capture every word, because not only did he like to be prepared for every eventuality, but he also wanted documentation of the way this idea had started, for purposes of comparison and contrast when he wrote up his final report. He took out a notebook and a pencil because he didn't trust the recorder as much as his own notes. Henry pulled out of his backpack a flyer that he'd ripped off the wall. It read, "Don't run in the halls." Does that mean the halls are on the third floor? Riley asked. Or all the halls in school? Or all the halls in government buildings? Or maybe it's an overall suggestion for every hall in the whole world. It's not the sign that bothers me, Henry said. The sign just reminds me of what a huge bully Dwight Hauser is. What, because he's big and mean and makes everyone in school do what he wants, and his mother intimidates all the other mothers in the parent volunteer group, and he makes infectious diseases seem preferable by comparison, and we can't stand him, Riley said. And because of the way he fed me bunny turds and told me they were chocolate-covered raisins when we were in kindergarten, Reed said with a touch of bitterness. Yes, especially the rabbit droppings. People like him always get away with everything because no one ever stands up to them. The thing with the sign was really annoying because I was standing there this morning reading it, and Hauser went barreling through the crowd like he was an armored tank blasting through a war zone. No reason, just because he could and thought it was funny to bounce people off the walls. No one said anything to him, even though the hall was full of teachers. Henry took a deep breath. Then he was mean to Marcy Robbins. Reed and Riley winced. He knocked her down when she got in his way, and then he called her stupid and laughed like it was a big joke when she started to cry. That scum! Riley put down his pencil. Marcy Robbins was sweet and quiet and so painfully shy that she blushed bright red when teachers called on her and stammered when she had to speak in front of the class and had probably never done anything wrong to anyone even once in her entire life. Plus, ever since she'd contributed some helpful information while they were planning the dumpster experiment, Riley had been keeping an eye on her. Any girl with the powers of observation she had shown was interesting to him, and he'd noticed how pretty she was, too. "I'm in," Riley said, closing his notebook. "What do you have in mind?" Reed asked. "This afternoon is field day. Since we finished our tests and turned in our books this morning, we're supposed to do PE outside all day. But I say we ditch that and hole up in the library." And come up with some flyers of our own. Riley opened his backpack and pulled out a ream of retina-searing fluorescent yellow copy paper. "Aren't you glad now that I'm always prepared for every eventuality?" Henry grinned. "Flyers printed on paper that color will really attract attention." Henry, Riley, and Reed were huddled around a computer terminal in the library, arguing about how to spell imbecile and whether it looked better to print DWIGHT across the top of the paper or down the left side, followed by the words dishonorable, wormy, insolent, grievous, harassing, and tormentor. Miss Davidson, the librarian, caught sight of them. Sure, they were up to no good and in a hurry to finish cleaning the library by the end of the school day. She called Reed over to her office. She was looking at the rabbit cage. "I need you to carry the bunny to my car, Reed. I'm taking him home for summer vacation." "Ooh," she wrinkled her nose. "I guess his cage hasn't been cleaned in a while. Be a dear and remove the soiled newspapers and replace them with clean, dry lining, will you? There are those plastic trash bags behind my desk. Be sure to dispose of the waste properly." "Sure thing," Reed said, more enthusiastically than Miss Davidson would have expected. A few minutes later, after a whispered conference with Riley and Henry, he hurried out the library with a plastic bag of rabbit turds. Henry stood by the copier, scooping copies off the tray and keeping an eye on Riley, who had just accessed the entire school's email address book and sent a mass emailing, after double-checking the spelling of the phrases barbarous imbecile, menacing tyrant, and puerile brute, as well as providing a hyperlink to his blog. Riley logged off, grabbed a roll of tape from Miss Davidson's desk, and met Henry at the door. By the time the next bell rang, 300 flyers had been taped on hallway walls or slid into faculty mailboxes, and a bag of rabbit byproduct had been smushed into the inner soles of the $350 gym shoes that rested in the backpack of one Dwight Hauser. The three boys looked at their handiwork, high-fived, and headed for the principal's office to turn themselves in. They might have been wrong in becoming vigilantes, but they weren't going to try to escape the blame. "Well, men," Henry said, "it's been a pleasure and a privilege to redress an injustice with you. The flyers have flown, the emails have mailed, and we have shown Dwight for the petty lowlife that he is." "That was awesome, Riley, that you had snapped the picture of his hairy butt crack when he bent over the locker room and that you cut and pasted it to the email. And Reed, that was a hilarious touch to put the bunny poop in his shoes. Brings the whole thing full circle." "It was," Riley agreed. "Awesome." "I'm so glad that someone other than me is going to wind up smelling like poop," Reed said. "I can't wait for summer vacation," Henry said. "We've really been held back with the whole school thing. Imagine 3 months of free time, and just as we're hitting our stride, people will read about us someday, songs will be sung, and movies will be made celebrating our audacious exploits. You just watch." So this is called the epilogue. It's not another chapter, which means this is like the extra information at the end of the story after the actual chapter's end. Epilogue. "Men, I have a great idea," Henry said to Reed and Riley as they sat in the principal's office waiting for their parents. They'd been suspended with 47 minutes left in the school year, and a wink and a handshake from the principal, who pretended to look stern. "No," Reed said sharply. Henry jumped. Okay, I hear you. "No more ideas," Reed continued. "Until I figure out how to explain to my parents that I've been suspended for the last 47 minutes of school because of your last idea." Riley didn't say anything, but he edged away from Henry on the bench. Henry just smiled. Henry's smile was one Reed and Riley had seen many times before, a smile of confidence and of knowledge that somehow, in some way, everything would work out all right. Excuse me. When Reed and Riley saw Henry smile, they knew. They knew that they would do whatever Henry's plan called for. They knew furthermore that they would always do whatever Henry's plan called for, because in the end, Henry had the best ideas, and his smile and his belief in his plans were so amazingly convincing. But Reed knew one more thing. No matter what, he would never land in poop again. And Riley knew from the look on Marcy Robbins' face when she poked her head into the principal's office and waved to him, clutching one of their flyers, that their exploits were finally going to attract the attention of females. So that she's going to join them on their next silly adventure there, the Masters of Disaster. If you like that one, check out something else by Gary Paulson if you can. He has kind of two different genres. He really writes a lot of adventure stories and then some very silly ones like this. We did have a huge collection of his books in the library on the author collection shelf, so you might have seen his work before, but he's really funny and his books are easy to find through Scholastic if anyone wants to order something. All right, guys, I'll see you in the next read aloud.